Earlier this semester, we walked through how a bill becomes a law and the legislative history that's made along the way, from start to finish. This video will help walk you through how to find that legislative history when you've got the law and want to work backward to figure out where it started and how it got where it got. This video will work with federal sources. State legislative history can be a bit sketchier and varies quite a bit depending on the state. Sometimes you'll find state equivalents of the sorts of sources in this video, sometimes not. But let's say we've got a federal statute or a provision of federal code and try and find the legislative history from there. Let's say that you know that there's a law concerning rulemaking that requires, say, a 100-word summary of any new rule. Either you've got the citation, because somebody pointed you there already, or you want to go browsing through the US code. The place that I like to start looking for US code is Congress's official website. The URL is uscode.house.gov, but if you look for house.gov or the Law Revision Council or the US Code, you'll find this source. This site lays out the titles of the US Code. You see them here. And in particular, let's say I know that I'm looking for government organizations. I want to find out about federal agencies generally. And in particular, I'm looking for administrative procedure. I'm interested in rulemaking. And there we go. Rulemaking, section 553. Somebody might well have pointed you there to say, go look at 5 US Code, section 553. Or you may find it by looking through a table of contents or browsing through related substantive statutes, just like that. If you click on this provision, Congress's site will open 5 USC section 553. This is about rulemaking. The section applies, except to the extent there's military or foreign affairs functions or agency management. Here are the rules for making up a rule. And oh, look, there's a section right here that says if you've got a new rule, you add a summary of not more than 100 words in plain language and post it on an internet website. It's the same statute we were looking at before. So now I know I've got this provision. I want to find out where it comes from. Beneath every section of the US Code on this site, there's a section of references. Here it is, right here. That tells you the statutes that that got smooshed together to form this section of US Code. We see there are 2 statutes here. Sometimes there are a lot more. Public Law 89-554 was passed in 1966. And then Public Law 118-9 was passed in 2023. These 2 statutes together gave us this section of the US Code. There's also an annotation here below about something that happened in 1946, which is a little weird when the statutory trail goes from 2023 to 1966 and then just stops. Let's figure out what this 1946 thing is. And I want to do that by taking you through what seems to be the origin point here in 1966, the first place this statutory section comes into being. Let's go to the statute. You see the reference here is 80, volume 80 of the Statutes at Large on page 383. The House website is hyperlinked, and it's hyperlinked to the relevant page. So if you click on this page, it will bring you slowly to volume 80, page 383. You can see that in the URL. You can see volume 80, page 383. And look, here's a section, section 553 on rulemaking. The section applies, except if there's a military or foreign affairs matter or another matter relating to agency management, a general notice of proposed rulemaking, you need the following things. This is where the statute started. Sure enough, this seems to say that this lays out the statute in its entirety. If I wanted more detail, more context, I could page forward or backward. The links up top here bring us to previous pages, page 382, page 381. Without knowing how long this statute is, I could be going back for a while. So what I want to do is find the statute as a whole from the beginning. I could page all the way back, keep hitting prior. But for laws passed since 1951, the easiest way to get the whole law in context is to go through congress.gov. And I'm looking here for law 89-554. So let's go to congress.gov. This has a lot of resources on it. There's a section on public laws. I want to start not with this Congress, which is the 118th Congress, but with the 89th Congress. That's because every public law citation like this starts with the number of the Congress and then the sequential number of the public law. So I want to find the 89th Congress. And I want to find the 554th law. I could page down, or I could just search in the web page itself. There it is. Public Law 89-554. Congress.gov will bring up the law, and it may take a second. And it'll bring up the statute as a whole, which lets me see some of the context for what Congress was doing when it enacted this statute. This one's quite large, 47 megabytes of a PDF, and so it's going to take a while to load. But once it does, you can see this is Public Law 89-554. Let me expand this a bit. And now you've got the context. Remember that I said sometimes Congress will take a volume of code, the smooshed together portion of a bunch of statutes, and just enact it as is so that the code book itself is a statute? That's what they did here. They enacted Title V of the US Code as its own statute. They took all of Title V of the code and just repeated it in the statute book. And that's what this 1966 law did. That makes things easier to find origin stories going forward. But if I want to find out where our provision on rulemaking came from, it makes it a little bit harder when Congress enacts a portion of code in a statute like this, because it effectively stops the research trail where Congress enacts the code as a whole. If I want to find the piece that was about rulemaking that went into Title V before it was enacted as a statute, I've got to go back farther again. So I'm going to look back at our US House Code, our 553 section that I'm looking for. And this historical note helps me find what happened before Congress in 1966 just passed the code volume as its own statute. If I want to find the real origin story, I've got to go back to these historical notes. And I want to take a look at this act in 1946. This tells me it's also hyperlinked. that I'm looking for volume 60, page 238 of the Statutes at Large. Volume 60, page 238 of the Statutes at Large. And if I look down a little bit, oh, there's a provision on rulemaking, except to the extent that there's involved any military or foreign affairs function, agency management. I'll go on to the next page, and I'll see a general notice of proposed rulemaking has to do a few different things. This looks like the same provision, and it's our origin story from 1946. This is the statute that originally enacted this provision of law. I'd like to get the whole thing, again, for some context. And there are a few ways to go about it. Remember that I said that Congress.gov had public laws, had statutes, but only from 1951 forward. And this one was in 1946. So it's not going to be on Congress.gov. If I went looking and went to my list of public laws and tried to find 1946, it would be before the compilation begins on Congress.gov. So how do I find the start of this statute? How do I find all of this statute? One way to do it is to actually use a book. And I think I just heard some of you groan, and flip backward through the book pages. That's probably fastest if I'm in the library, and our library has old copies of the Statutes at Large. I could find the 60th volume and just flip back through a few pages. Online, I could just page back through the statute. Page 238, page 237. This is the beginning of the statute. It's chapter 324. It used to be, and if you expand, you can see this, Senate Bill 7, passed in 1946. This happens to be the Administrative Procedure Act, and is something we'll spend a lot of time with later in the semester. And that was nice and easy paging back, because all I had to do was go back 3 pages or so. But if the section I'm interested in, if the section on rulemaking were 500 pages into the statute, that would take a while. There are a few ways to find the origin, to find the beginning of the act, without just paging backward from the section that you're interested in. One way is to recognize that the statutes at large are laid out chronologically. So I could jump around, skip around by page to go back volume 60, page 180, and see whether I'm at the beginning of my statute or well past it. I know my statute was passed on June 11th, 1946. This is well past it. So maybe I skip forward for a little bit. Nope, still not there. Maybe I skip forward a little bit more. Nope, still not there, but I know I'm getting closer. Now I can just go page by page to see, oh, there we are, back at the statute that I wanted to find. But if I don't want to look chronologically, there are a few other places to find full statutes before 1951. One of them is through the Library of Congress, which has a lot of historical materials that are extremely valuable. This URL is a good one to take note of: memory.loc, libraryofcongress.gov, American Memory, AMMEM, and American Law. If you don't remember that, you can either bookmark it or Google U.S. congressional documents at the Library of Congress. But this page in particular has a lot of materials for early sources that we'll come back to. I mentioned we wanted to find the beginning of this particular, of this statute from 1946 in volume 60 of the statutes at large. The statutes at large are listed here. U.S. statutes at large, not just the bibliographic records, but the whole thing. And you'll see that the Library of Congress has a collection of the statutes at large, not from 1951, but from the very beginning. So if I wanted to find volume 60 from 1946, I could find it and open it and get images of volume 60 of the statutes at large. I could, if I wanted, download the whole thing, 180 megabytes, and then flip through it virtually. That would take a while. I could look for the images in sequence, page by page, and flip through them that way. That would also take a while. But either are possible. Either ways to find the original page of the statute where it was started from 1946. That's all free to the public. Another really good source is a research database that you have access to because you're a student at Loyola. It's called Hein Online, and you may already have used it for some other materials. It has a huge array of sources, including a lot of good historical sources. When you get to the Hein Online home screen, and that can be, you can find it just by typing in heinonline.org. If you log in, it will ask you if you want to access through your institution. And sure enough, Loyola is mentioned in the institutional pages. And if you log in, I'm already logged in, so this may skip a step, but it'll take you through verification where you verify that you're a Loyola student and then deliver you to this page. And you can now see we're in Hein through Loyola Law School's access provided by the Raines Library. On this page, you can find a lot of really interesting sources, including the U.S. statutes at large. And if you go to the U.S. statutes at large and look for historical sources, volume 60 from 1946, the nice thing about Hein's system is that it's indexed based on individual laws. Chapter 2, that's one law. Chapter 3, that's another law. Chapter 4, that's another law. You can page down and find the appropriate chapter, which we know we're looking for from the individual stats page. We first found our rulemaking statute here. That's chapter 324 from 1946, volume 60 of the statutes at large. And if we hadn't gone back and searched for the beginning of the statute, if we didn't know where it was, we're just here on the section that we're interested in. This page still gives us enough information to know what we're going to look for. Volume 60 of the statutes at large, chapter 324 is the statute that we want. Volume 60 of the statutes at large, chapter 324 is the statute that we want, is the page that we want. And Hein will deliver us directly to that first page of the statute, the Administrative Procedure Act. If I wanted not to page through page by page, but I wanted to download the whole Administrative Procedure Act, print download options will bring up a window that asks me whether I want a custom page range or all of the current section, the 9 pages from pages 237 to 245. And that will deliver me after an initial Hein Online information page, the statute, Chapter 324, the Administrative Procedure Act, which includes a section on rulemaking that has the piece I'm interested in. We'll spend a lot of time with the Administrative Procedure Act later in the semester. But for now, I just wanted to show you how to find older statutes. If you've got a law with an origin story before a volume of the code was itself passed by Congress, that's how you go after it. Now let's go back to the US Code section that we were actually interested in. We were looking for this 100-word summary. And we had found it here in section B4. On this page, again, in Congress's layout of the US Code, down toward the end of the section, they list amendments, and they show you what each subsequent statute did. So our origin story was in 1966, which was a volume of the code passed into a statute. The original was in 1946. But in 2023, pardon me, there was a new statute that did something that modified this section, and this amendments portion of the layout of the code tells you what it did. In 2023, Public Law 118.9 added paragraph 4 to subsection B. This thing that we're interested in, B4, was the product of the law in 2023. Now I want to go trace back the legislative history of that provision. I want to know not where this whole section came from, but where this amendment came from, the thing that added section B4. So I want to get Public Law 118.9. It's hyperlinked. I can click on it. This law is actually new enough that the page looks a little funky. The image is from a public law print or an enrolled bill, but not from the statutes at large volume, because it's too new to have been put in the statutes at large volume that this site has. Let's see if congress.gov does better. It's got more recent copies of the statutes at large. We're looking for Public Law 118.9. So we're going to go to congress.gov, back up to the public laws, to Public Law, the 118th Congress, Public Law 118.9. There it is. And if we pull up the text, we pull up PDF of the text, you can see we're adding, after paragraph 3 of subsection 553B, part 4, give me a 100-word plain language summary on an internet website of any new rule. This is the amendment that added section B4. There's a lot of information on this page. We've talked about it before when we were walking through how a bill becomes a law, but this page, the statutes at large page, tells you that this used to be Bill Senate 111. At the bottom of the page, it tells us the legislative history, at least some of it, for Senate Bill 111. including the fact that there's a report from the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, report number 11828. And it gives us two crucial dates from the congressional record. From volume 169 of the congressional record, on June 22nd, it passed the Senate. On July 17, it passed the House. That's a lot of good information. There's even more good information in the congress.gov page on the bill, on Senate Bill 111, the thing that became the Providing Accountability Through Transparency Act of 2023. It automatically defaults to opening to the text of the provision, either in plain text form or in a PDF. But there's a lot more information that it's got. If you click on this red bar that says Show Overview, you'll see the lead sponsor of the bill, Senator Lankford. His co-sponsors will be listed in a tab underneath: Senators Sinema, Johnson, Risch, Braun, and Peters. This overview box also shows you that a Senate committee held a hearing on March 29th. It'll show you that there was a Senate report from the relevant committee, and if you click on the hyperlink, it will give you the report itself in both plain text and in a PDF. And this page also gives you an overview of action on the bill. The latest is right up top, but there's a separate tab that tells you what happened, with an overview and with every step along the way, from either newest to oldest, or if you want to track the bill the other direction, oldest to newest. It shows you what happened when, with links to the congressional record, to the Journal of Proceedings. So it tells you about the committee report. It tells you about the day on which it passed the Senate and the congressional record site. It tells you that there was a consideration, a substantial debate on July 17th. And if we want, we can open up that link to the congressional record on July 17th. It'll give you a little bit of an index of the things that were considered on these pages of the congressional record. And the discussion we're most interested in is the Providing Accountability Through Transparency Act of 2023. We can find that in both plain text and in PDF. Here's the start of the discussion on the Providing Accountability Through Transparency Act of 2023, the bill that we're interested in, S111, and some speeches given on that. Some of the actions in the congressional record, some of the ones that we're interested in, aren't hyperlinked. So, for example, you see that this bill was introduced in the Senate on January 26th, 2023. But there's no hyperlink in the actions section. Congress.gov knows if you really want to go deep, for recent bills in particular, they've got you covered. And right here, above the list of actions, there's a link to bill history and references in the congressional record. And if you click on it, it will give you all of the references in the congressional record, starting from the very beginning. So if you want to see when on the 26th of January, this bill was introduced, it'll give you that record page. The introduction of bills and joint resolutions, you see lots of different Senate bills, Senate Bill 91, 92, 93. On the next page, you'll see Senate Bill 111. Here's the official introduction of the bill. So this compilation in congress.gov of the individual pieces of congressional record sites is really valuable. If you're looking for the congressional record before, or if you're looking for the congressional record and it doesn't happen to be here, if I can't find what I'm looking for in this hyperlinked section, as long as I have the date, I'm still good to go. So if all I know is on January 26th, 2023, this bill was introduced, but I don't have the page in the congressional record, I can still find that date and look for references to the bill that I'm interested in. Congress.gov has the daily version of the congressional record back to 1873. And if I want to find it, there's a link up here in the top right to congressional record. I'm looking for January 26th, 2023. This is now being fiddly. It hasn't yet been compiled, so I'm going to browse by date instead. I'm going to collapse September because I'm looking for January. And in particular, I'm looking for January 26th. In the Senate, that's where I know it was introduced. I can either look for something that topically fits what I'm looking for, what I'm seeking, or I can download the whole section for January 26th and search for the bill that I'm interested in, section 111. And there it is. I didn't know the page, but I knew the date, and I could find the date through the records on congress.gov. If you're looking for the congressional record before 1873, it'll be in a different place. Congress.gov only has congressional records since 1873. And if you want to go way back, you're going to have to go to a different location. Again, the Library of Congress has a lot of great materials from early days of the Republic, 1875 and before. Before the congressional record, the Journal of Proceedings in Congress was called the Congressional Globe. Before that, it was called the Register of Debates. And before that, it was called the Annals of Congress. And this site has links to all of those materials where you can browse or search, including browsing by particular dates before 1873. And again, as long as you know the day that you're looking for, you can find the materials here. Some of these materials are indexed so that even if you don't know the day, but you know the session of Congress, you'll be able to find the material that you're looking for. Let's go back. There's one more piece of detail that I want to show you for Senate Bill 111 in the current Congress. Oops, pardon me. That was looking for the congressional record. I want to find the legislative page on Senate 111 itself. So I would look for legislation and just allow it to find Senate Bill 111. There we are. On this reference page, which tells you a lot of information, It will also show you related bills. Sometimes you can find out a lot about why Congress might have passed one particular piece of legislation by looking through the debate about other related bills that they've passed. Sometimes Congress will explain what it was doing in the discussion over similar things. Here you'll see a bill, Senate Bill 1615, that didn't actually go anywhere. But if you wanted, you could trace its legislative history back the same way I showed you for the bill that became law, Senate 111. So that's a pretty good start for a set of materials for how to trace legislative histories for relatively recent laws. Looking into Senate Bill 111, if we were interested in the history of that provision 5 U.S. Code B4, 5 U.S. Code section 553 B4, why did Congress want agencies to post a 100-word summary on a website? You'd be able to find out why by tracing back through, as I showed you, finding Bill 118.9, going back and finding the Senate bill or the House bill that became this provision, and then tracing through the individual pieces of legislative history to try and get a sense for what Congress said it was thinking. For relatively recent laws, that's a pretty good approach. And particularly for relatively recent statutes, Westlaw can do this for you as well, bundled together in a package. If you're at an initial Westlaw screen and you want to put in Public Law 118.9, Westlaw is pretty good at finding you the relevant statute and then giving you legislative history materials. It'll give you congressional record citations, and it'll even give you committee reports, like here, the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs report on the statute. Westlaw is not great at giving you original PDFs, and I actually find it easier to both read and process some of the original PDF materials, which is part of why I like congress.gov and the pages of the statutes at large laid out as they were meant to be laid out and not laid out here in modified text electronic form. But if you get stuck, or if you actually prefer this view, Westlaw does a pretty good job of compiling the record citations and relevant materials for newer statutes. Older statutes are a little different. Let's say you wanted to do the same thing to trace back legislative history as we just have for Title VII. But Title VII is the only information you've got. One place to start is actually just Googling Title VII. You're looking for a citation, really. You're looking for a code citation or a statutory citation. That's the place where you want to begin your legislative history. And the best citation is the current code section. Government sources are usually promising ways to find current code sections or other statutory references. So here I see the Federal Trade Commission has something about Title VII. Maybe that's a place to get started. Equal employment opportunity. There's a reference to Title VII. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects employees and job applicants from employment discrimination. That sounds like the right thing. That sounds like the thing that's doing what I expect. So now I know it's not just Title VII, it's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's a good start. I could now Google the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and see whether I can find a citation. And thankfully, Wikipedia is pretty good with this. Other government sites are pretty good with this. You see the citation of Public Law 88-352. That's the 88th Congress and the 352nd law they've passed, which also appears on page 241 of volume 78 of the statutes at large. That's all good. That's going to get me to the original. And because this is after 1951, I know that if I want to find the original, I can go to congress.gov. I can go to the public laws. I can go to the 88th Congress. And I can find the 352nd law of the 88th Congress, which is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It started as HR 7152. Now I've got a bill number. That's great. And I can start in on my research here. I can make sure that the text I want is the text I've got. It'll open up, sure enough, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But if I look in the actions to try and trace back the congressional record, there's not a lot here for older statutes. It gives you the basics, which is a place to start, but not much more than that. Congress.gov's search engine for older bills is actually more powerful than its summaries of the bills itself. For newer bills, these summaries are super helpful and lay everything out pretty clearly. For older bills, you may want to use the search bar up top to see if you can find more information. So I would look for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in legislation, or I would look for HR 7152 in legislation. I want to put it in quotes so that I get the whole thing and not just any legislation passed in 1964. And you'll see it returns a lot of hits, in part because it's looking for any reference to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, including from current Congresses. So I want to find the legislative history of the Congress that actually passed this thing. I want the 88th Congress in 1964. And now I've got a lot fewer choices. This is just giving me the statute itself. If I ask for the congressional record as well, now I'll get some citations to individual discussions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on particular days. This is better. There's going to be a lot here. The debates, as we've discussed, for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were really robust. But this will start me down toward finding each of the citations to the congressional record in those debates. Sometimes, for some statutes, the best way to see what happened is actually to read through each of those pages. Sometimes someone else has done the work for you, and particularly for prominent statutes, there are compilations of legislative history that might make all of this easier. Hein Online, again, has a really great resource. Not this time the statutes at large, but other compilations of legislative history for particular statutes. So as I log in, it will deliver me to this front page. And right next to the statutes at large, you see the U.S. Federal Legislative History Library. This does not have all legislative histories, so don't get confused by the fact that it says the U.S. Federal Legislative History Library, but it does have compilations of legislative history for some. And the best place to find the breadth of what Hein Online has is in this Sources of Compiled Legislative Histories database. It's got a number of really great ways to search, including the public law number, or the popular name of the law. We know that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was public law number 88352. We found that before when we were Googling. And if we look for public law number 88352 in this legislative history database, well, sometimes we find an error. But sometimes Hein Online will deliver us to a few different things. Individual scholarship on legislative history published in different places, including some law review articles and the like. But for our purposes, governmental sources for the legislative history of the Civil Rights Act, which include a compilation of lots of different sources for what the legislature was thinking. Some of them, for example, are just listings of the pages in the congressional record, right, where Congress discussed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 working forward. But this compilation also has things like the House report or the Senate report from the bill itself. And if you click on this particular resource, it will show you and allow you to download if you wish the House committee report, the Judiciary Committee report, for the bill that became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's lots of really good material in these compiled legislative histories. And when other people have done that work, that can really be useful in shortcutting, wandering through the pages of the congressional record to find out where Congress discussed what. Westlaw has a version of this as well, some compiled legislative histories, particularly for really prominent statutes. If you look for US legislative history, you'll see a content resource called USGAO Federal Legislative Histories. And that has, as it says, legislative histories for most public laws between 1921 and 1995. That's in our sweet spot for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And if we put in the same public law number, we'll get Westlaw's compilation of legislative documents, including pages in the congressional record and including some House reports, committee reports, and the like. So all of that are ways to get the legislative history of the original bill. I said I was curious about Title VII, and so I went looking for the legislative history of the original bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that helped us get to Title VII. But sometimes the thing that you want isn't the original bill, it's an amendment. Title VII's been amended a few different times. And that's part of why the best source is the current code section. So let's trace through again and see if we can't find the current code section. I was looking for Title VII, and I found a government page. That told us that Title VII was Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let me click through to this link and see if I have more of a clue of a current code section. And in fact, I do. Up here at the top, the note says that Title VII, as amended, appears in Volume 42 of the U.S. Code, beginning at Section 2000E. That's great. That's going to help me find the full history of the law, not just when it was originally passed, but as it may have been amended. So I could start right there with the US Code from my source at Congress, jumping to Title 42, Section 2000E. And that would bring up the start of Title 7, which is the section on definitions. But if I jump right to that particular section and all I know is the code in general, this doesn't give me a good feel for the structure. It doesn't let me know what comes next. And so I actually prefer to see in context all of the provisions, because maybe I'm looking for a particular section and it's not the definitions, but I don't know where it is. So rather than jumping straight there, I want to see it in context. I want to go to Title 42 and see if I can't find Section 2000E along with the sections that are next to it. Over here on the right, you'll see that Congress has helpfully laid out where various sections of different parts of Title 42 live. So if I'm looking for 2000E, it's going to be here in civil rights. It's going to be here in equal employment opportunities. And now I can see how the section is laid out. I get a little bit of sense of the structure of the law. Section 2000E is definitions, just like we found before. But maybe that's not the part of Title VII I'm looking for. If I go to unlawful employment practices, this is the section of the statute that we were looking at the other day in class, the section in Griggs, the section in Weber. It shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer to limit, segregate, or classify his employees in any way which would tend to deprive you of equal opportunity on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And down underneath the code itself, you see the statutes that got us there. Not only the original Title VII in 1964, but an amendment in 1972 and another amendment in 1991. Looking down the page at amendments, Congress will show you what each bill did, what each statute did. So in 1972, there was an amendment to subsection A2 and an amendment to subsection C2. In 1991, we added subsections K, L, M, and N. And if I happen to be interested in subsection K, the burden of proof in disparate impact cases, and I wanted to find out why that particular provision was added to this portion of Title VII, I know from the amendments that subsection K was added by this public law, 102.166, section 105A. I can go to the hyperlinked portion of this page to find, in particular, Public Law 102.166, Section 105A, which adds Section K to that portion of Title VII. If I want this whole statute to see the context for why it was added, I can do the same thing I did before, to go to congress.gov, look for Public Law 102.166, Public Law 102.166, which is the Civil Rights Act of 1991. The bill was Senate 1745. And this will give me more information about why we've added subsection K. I can look in the actions. Here's a summary, but I can look for all of them to get more information. It looks like there was a whole bunch of amendments. It looks like there was a whole bunch of discussion. It looks like something happened on October 7th. It's not hyperlinked here, but I can go find it because I know the date. So let's go find October 7th, 1991 in the congressional record. The Daily Digest isn't available, but I know that I want a debate in the Senate. Here's the Senate congressional record from October 7th, 1991. I know I'm looking for a bill that was Senate Bill 1745. I can just search for 1745. And sure enough, there it is, right there in the middle of the page, the Civil Rights Act of 1991. We're debating Senate Bill 1745, and we can see what happened on October 7th. Let's say we want to go back earlier still. So we've looked for a statute from 2023. We've looked for a statute from 1964 and 1991. Let's say we want to find the alien contract labor law at issue in the Church of the Holy Trinity. All I know is it was the alien contract labor law. So I'm going to see if Google can give me a lead on a citation. Again, Wikipedia is actually pretty good for this. And sure enough, I got a lead that I want to look for volume 23 of the Statutes at Large, page 332. And I'm looking for a statute in 1885. Excellent. That's more than enough to go on. The Statutes at Large from before 1951. I'm going to find at the Library of Congress. I'm going to find the Statutes at Large. I'm going to find volume 23 in 1885. Here, because I already know the page, and that's real good, I can go to the individual images. I don't need to download the whole thing. I can find single images and just tell it which one I want. So here's that volume 23 of the Statutes at Large. I know the page I want is page 332. Now, this is going to be the page of the PDF, not the actual page of the volume. And you can see the page of the volume it's opened up. That's a little bit big. Is page 304. So I want to go find a little bit forward in this volume to find the page of Statutes at Large. It's probably about 30 pages of front matter. So let's see if we can't find page 332. There we go. Page 332, volume 23. And down at the bottom, an act to prohibit the importation and migration of foreigners and aliens under contract or agreement to perform labor in the United States. This is the alien contract labor law. And now we have a lot more information. We can download this as an image file if we want to keep it. We can go on to the next page if we want to see more about what happened here, this tells us that the statute was passed on February 26th, 1885. What if I wanted to find the debates, not the statutory text itself, but the discussion about it? One thing I could do is go look on Hein Online for a ready-made legislative history, see if somebody else did the work for me. So I log in. I'm going to go to those ready-made legislative histories. I'm going to go to my sources of compiled legislative histories. And here it's letting me browse by Congress. I can save a lot of time. I'll just see if there's anything from the 48th Congress in 1885 that anybody's already done the work on. Rats. Something from the 49th Congress, something from the 47th Congress, nothing from that particular Congress I'm looking for. If I want to find out more about the alien contract labor law, I'm going to have to go look it up myself. The very old-fashioned way. Back to the Library of Congress again. I'm looking for the debates because I want to know what they were thinking. So I'll go to the congressional record, but I don't yet know what date I'm looking for. I know I'm looking for 1885, but I don't yet know when in 1885. So I'm going to find the congressional record from that Congress, pardon me, not the 49th, but the 48th. That's the one I'm looking for. And right here up top is a history of bills and resolutions. I know the statute I want was passed on February 26th, 1885. So I'm looking for the history of bills that were enacted or discussed in 1885. And if I open up this page of the congressional record, I don't know the bill number. You can see that it's organized by bill number. But I know the subject. The subject here is the importation and migration of foreigners. So let me see if the index to this volume in 1885 helps me find the importation and migration of foreigners. There it is. HR 2550 in 1885 to prohibit the importation and migration of foreigners and aliens under contract or agreement to perform labor. This looks like the alien contract labor law, and now I have a bill number. And more than that, the index to the congressional record will tell me where the discussion was and what it was about. It was debated in certain pages. It was amended, and those amendments passed the Senate on certain pages. The House concurred in those amendments on certain pages. These page references are all references to pages of the congressional record for 1885. So now I'm on my way. It looks like there was a particularly robust discussion from pages 1621 to 1635. And I can go back to the record from that year to see if I can find pages 1621 to 1635. I'm in the Senate, in the meeting minutes, in the congressional record. That's page 1613. That's page 1621. And right there, we start a debate on foreign labor contracts. And in particular, the importation and migration of foreigners and aliens under contract to perform labor in the United States. This is the beginning of that portion of the debate, the page in the congressional record for this bill in 1885. So that's a little bit of an overview of how to find legislative histories, how to find debates on the floor, how to find committee reports, how to find statutory sections that might have amended particular legislation. There are lots and lots and lots of other potential sources, including bits and pieces of other materials. And as I mentioned, state legislative histories are sometimes quite a bit spottier, and how you'll find them is going to vary state by state. But I hope this is a pretty good start to researching the legislative history of most federal statutes. The law librarians at Loyola and elsewhere can also be an enormous help for particular projects. And if you have other questions about particular sources, please ask. I hope that helps you find out how to trace the history of a statute backward using just a few sources that you have available to you to find all the materials you'll need.